How's it going, everybody? I came across this video from First Fruits of Zion, and it provoked something in me that I think is really important. It's questioning how John uses the term "the Jews" in the Gospel of John. And his take here is that John is essentially using the term in a negative way. And I want to point out that if that's your take on the Gospel of John, then you're just not paying attention. Now, I'll leave a link to this video, so if you want to, you can watch the whole thing seamlessly. I will point out little clips that I think are relevant, but of course, it's sort of annoying to do that. If you want to get the whole thing, yeah, you can watch the link. Mostly what I want to do is use this as a jumping off point to really look at what John is doing in his gospel, because I think he's a master at telling the story of who Jesus really is and how he confronts and comforts the world around him, whether you be Jew, Gentile, religious, or not. John is a master storyteller, and I don't want something like this to obscure our view of what John is actually doing, because he's showing us something about Jesus. And so I'm glad you're with me. Let's get into it.
John uses the term the Jews way more negatively than the other Gospels. At first glance, that can look pretty anti-Semitic, but let's unpack what's going on here. John was written in a time of intense persecution under the Roman Emperor Domitian. Jewish disciples of Yeshua were being hunted down, and tragically, some Jews in the wider Jewish community even betrayed their fellow Jews to Roman authorities.
So when he says John uses the term negatively, I will point out that sometimes it's negative, but not always. And so to just sort of paint it as though John is using the term the Jews negatively is really an error that I think costs us a lot in the way of understanding what John is doing in his gospel and why he is writing things the way he's writing them.
That betrayal, it cut deep. So when John uses the term the Jews negatively, it's not about all Jews everywhere. It's a raw, painful polemic against those who turn their backs on their own people.
So what I want to do is just sort of build on this First Fruits of Zion conversation, because again, I do think that a lot of the confusion comes from what I think is a mistranslation and the ambiguous and sort of anachronistic way that we're talking about the Jews. And I feel like a lot of this conversation does not go back to the author's intent. So what is John's intent in his gospel? How does God reveal to him? And then how does John write this out? Because John is a master at telling stories. He doesn't do anything, and none of the Bible authors do this. They don't use superfluous language. Everything is there for a reason. So when John uses the term the Jews, he's doing that for a reason. Now, you'll look through John's gospel at how he uses this, and then look at the structure of John's gospel, and you'll realize that it's not really about the Jews versus Jesus, or with what the First Fruits of Zion video was trying to say, which is like John is being negative towards this group of people. No, John is painting a picture of light versus darkness, death versus new life or resurrected life, which is why the story of Lazarus is right in the middle of John's gospel. It's a story of new life, and what John will do is he'll actually use the person of Nicodemus to show you that some of the Jews understood this and some of the Jews rejected it. So there's a lot of nuance actually going on in how John uses this term. It's not just negative. I don't think it's negative at all. So again, I think that a lot of people just misunderstand. And it's unfortunate because you have there could be meaningful conversation happening, and yet, we seem sort of locked in this. So hopefully this is part of meaningful conversation, and hopefully I'm not getting too triggered by it. But anyway, let's understand how John uses the term Jews in his gospel. Let's understand the authorial intent, the intent of the author, not what our modern sentiment might be producing in us. But let's just literally look at how John uses it. Okay. John's let's question the portrayal of Jews in John's gospel, suggesting it's often misunderstood. I think I've done that. Okay, so and I'll do this. The antagonistic view of Jews in John's gospel, contrasting it with the actual narrative. Now, does Jesus combat with people? Yeah, of course he does. Does he go toe-to-toe with the Jewish religious leaders? Yes, of course he does. But is it because they're Jews, or is it because he wants to show people something that they're struggling to see? And so, yeah, Jesus is going to provoke people. He's going to provoke the religious people, essentially, as he does today. John's gospel is really a war between darkness and light. It's not Jews versus Jesus. We've said that. The term, so tan Judean, ha Judean, the Jews. Okay, so this is where, and I've tried to build on this all the while, trying also to communicate. I'm not a Bible linguist person, but I do think it's clear. And the more that I look into it, the term the Jews or Jew is mistranslated. More often than not, a better translation would be Judean or Judeans. Okay, so this is plural, Judaion. It's the plural form of Judaios, which would be Jew. It's frequently used in John's gospel, more so than the other gospels. And he, again, uses it very specifically. So most of the confusion, as with this video, comes from the mistranslation of this term. And again, I'll do my best to sort of, pronounce it right and get the Greek is really interesting in its tenses and the way it uses thing. And so I'll try to keep it square. So if I mess up, let me know. And yeah, I do like if you just pause for a second and look through, and I'll do another video on this. Again, I'll build on this, but I've pointed it out more often than not. The context is geography. The context is regional, and John will use this very specifically, again, in the middle of his gospel, to show us the resurrected kingdom of God, the true Israel of God, and why we need Jesus for that. It doesn't have to do with where you're born. It doesn't have to do with your tradition. It has to do with who is your Lord and Master, and is it Jesus? And if it is, then you are invited into a resurrected kingdom, regardless of whether you are Jew or Gentile. Nicodemus, okay, so right at the beginning of John's gospel. This is John chapter 3. Essentially, it's essentially just follows the prologue of John's in his sort of introduction there. We see Nicodemus, this ruler of the Jews. And I think that he becomes a very specific person because John will use him here in chapter 3. We will see him again in chapter 19. And a good storyteller is going to give you that framework to understand what he's doing. They're going to build a framework. They're going to give you the themes. And that is how you interpret. You don't just go, oh, it seems negative. It's like, no, it might seem negative. John's use of the term the Jews might seem negative if you're not paying attention. So let's not do that. So right there at the very beginning, you have this dialogue between Jesus and Nicodemus. And I mean, Jesus does kind of hold his feet to the flames. He's like, are you a teacher? I mean, do you not get this? But he also says, hey, I'm gonna show you, like with Nathaniel, he's like, I'm going to show you the heavenly things, ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And he introduces to Nicodemus right here the idea of new birth, born of the Spirit. And John introduces this in John 1, but as many who have received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name. And belief and seeing and witnessing the signs of Jesus are going to be huge. Some people see, some people don't see. And they were those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but God. So the children of God, the children of this new resurrected life, this new resurrected kingdom. And so he's going to invite Nicodemus, this ruler of the Jews, into that. And as John will record for us, we see Nicodemus at the end. He has become a true follower of Jesus. He is the one who pays essentially for the burial of Jesus. It focuses on new birth, new creation. Battle between light and darkness is there. Let's see. And when we see Nicodemus again, or we see Nicodemus here in John 3, he visits Jesus at night, and Jesus points out that people who love evil love the night because their deeds are evil. He wants to hide, right? He wants to hide something. And Jesus wants to reveal that, right? He wants to reveal that in us. At the end of John's gospel, the Jewish religious leaders will seize Jesus at night, reflecting this, and again, highlighting their evil deeds. But Nicodemus will also come at the end of John's gospel, along with Joseph of Arimathea, another Jew who is a follower of Jesus. And it's really interesting because the followers of Jesus all flee because of fear. But these two men who previously were living in fear of the Jewish religious leaders now come forth and say, no, we're not going to live in fear anymore. We're going to come out and we're going to bury Jesus in a way that would honor this man. And so they bury him. And then, of course, we also see Mary coming to him at night, but she sort of pierces through the darkness, right? So this is the new kingdom of Jesus, the light in the darkness. Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, Mary, they're going to come to the garden, right? The new garden, the renewed garden. They're going to be lights in dark places, and that's what John is doing. If you just want to say, oh, John is just sort of critical of the Jews, and there are, he is like he John, like Jesus, they're not going to pull punches. He's going to expose something about this particular group that he calls the Jews. Now, it's really important, though, that we don't forget Nicodemus is part of that group. What John is telling us is that some of the Jews rejected Jesus, but some of the Jews did not. Some could see past the fact that Jesus didn't meet their expectations. They had an expectation of the Messiah. And when Jesus came and Jesus was confronting that expectation, some people went, yeah, maybe my expectation is false, but he is the true Messiah. And other people went, no, we got it right. And so let's kill this guy. Because he's pushing, he's challenging our status, really, our authority. And there's so much here in the Gospel of John. I'm going to give you the beginning. I've sort of I'll tie that to the end here in John 19, and then we'll look at Lazarus. So the beginning, the end, and then we'll look at the middle, and that's going to help us really understand what John is doing. There is so much here, and if you're hanging in there with me, thank you as I go on this sort of rant. But hopefully it is productive. I really do think John is doing some important work here. So John 19, wow. The Jewish religious leaders, their allegiance is to Caesar, contrasting with God's rejection by the Israelites in the book of Samuel. So if we go to 19:12 through 16, it's, a lot of people will disagree with me on translating Judaios as Jew, because we don't want to lose the religious context here. We don't want to lose the religious connotation of this word, and I would agree. We don't want to lose this. Now, I think Judean does fine because, again, it's our modern structure that would look at that word as being mostly geographical or regional. In the ancient world, it was not really that way. If you were from Ephesus, it would carry a lot of weight for communicating your maybe religious traditional background. I mean, even today, if I say I have a friend who's from India, there's geography involved in that, but there's also history and religion and tradition. It doesn't mean that person is Hindu per se, but certainly Hinduism influenced how they were brought up, right? So even today, it's when we think of something like Judean or Indian or Californian, like, yes, it's geographical, but it's not just geographical. And so the people who say, well, we can't really translate Judaios as Judean because it strips away the religious and tradition and historical context, I think are just missing it. Like, that's just not how we use the words. I get what they're pushing against, but I don't know that the word Jew really carries with it at least John's intent for how he uses that word. Because we'll see it's clearly more than a religious term, and we see that right here in John 19. So Pilate, he wants to release Jesus, right? The Jews come and they're like, okay, we gotta crucify this guy. Pilate heard these words. He brought out and sat down on the judgment seat. I'm in John 19:13 in a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, behold your king. Okay, behold your king. And they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests answered and said, we have no king but Caesar. So the priests make a political move. They make a very clearly political move. Oh, we have no king but Caesar. They know exactly where they are. They know who really controls this region. And they know that if they don't play this political game, they will lose their position. They will lose their seat. Even, and we'll see this here, it comes up with Lazarus here in a second. So I just wanted to point that out. This is clearly a political move because this group is not only religious. They are religious. I'm not saying they're not, but they're also very political. And it's, maybe sometimes unfortunate how those things can obscure each other. But again, if we were to just translate the word Jew for the sake of preserving the religious connotation of the word, we will then lose this political connotation as well. Because, and I think John is doing this intentionally. If we look at 1 Samuel 8:7, Yahweh is supposed to be the king. He's the king of Israel. So if Jews are representatives of Israel, of course they come from the tribe of Judah. That's where the name comes from. That's where they are. They're in the region that was given to Judah, or the tribe of Judah. So again, Judean, right? If they were representing Israel, then they should say, Yahweh is our king. We have no king but Yahweh. But they're representing something else. And this, goes all the way back to Samuel. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people and regard all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me for being king over them. And so God gives them Saul, and the rest of the history is there. It doesn't exactly go well. Of course, we get David. We get a little peek, a little preview. But yeah, it just doesn't go well because the people have rejected Yahweh as their king. Now, back to this. It's really interesting what John does, and it's unfortunate that we often get this missed. So the leaders use religion as a guise for their political agenda. Wow, interesting. Maintaining power through religious language, but they're maintaining political power using this religious language. Now, here's why I think this is important for us today, because I think the same thing is going on. Why do people, I do think the people, the Judaizers, right? And I think like apostate prophet is like S tier Judaizer. First Fruits of Zion, they're not as high on the list. I actually think First Fruits of Zion does some good work. But there's political reasons why they want to keep the language vague, right? Keep it vague. and just say the Jews as though it means kind of anything, from first century religious leaders in Judea to our modern religious group. And it's just, there's so much going on that one word, we're asking one word, Jew or Jews, to just do too much work. And so there's this political move that's wrapped in a religious guise, and I think honestly the same thing is going on today. Okay, I want to point out this video from Ash, even though I have his name written down wrong.
We do see this trend where the leadership is very corrupt and has very little to do with the rest of the people. And although they are allied with the stronger forces around, they really don't have a concern for what happens with the rest of the Jewish population. They're incredibly corrupt, they're power hungry, they are not authentic to the role they're claiming to be in charge of. They are, in the case of the high priesthood, they're not even of the priests anymore. They are the rulership, the leadership of the Jewish people all throughout that time period, with the brief momentary point in history where it was Mattathias, Matityahu, the high priest of the Hasmoneans, who was authentic to the role, who was legitimately trying to keep Torah law and a connection of the Jewish people with God, and so on. Immediately following, there is this degradation where it goes back into Jews being obsessed with other cultures, Hellenism, idol worship, and so on, bringing in foreign powers to help them solidify their own little power that they have. And that is ultimately what leads to the demise of the Jewish people in the first century. It's also important to take the lesson from the greater context, which is that this trend has continued until today, where there are people that are somewhat part of the Jewish population that are incredibly corrupt, and they're in a leadership position, and they kind of dictate this face that the Jewish people have to the rest of the world, wherever they might be. And they are power hungry. They don't care about the rest of the Jewish population, and in most cases, they have very little to do with the rest of the Jewish population. However, they are leadership, they are power. And so when people look at the Jewish people, that's kind of what they see. Not only that, there is this sentiment in the Jewish community where all Jews are together, all Jews are brothers, everyone is part of, if you're a Jew, you're part of the group. However, that is incredibly destructive thinking, because there are people that you would include in that group who don't care about you. They don't care about the rest of the Jewish people. They care about money and power, and they are actually leading to a lot of major problems that occur in every generation with the Jewish people, where the Jewish people are then scapegoated, sometimes purely out of malice, but sometimes in response to these Jewish people that are leadership. They are corrupt leadership elites. They are not the rest of the Jewish people.
So I hope that clip from Ash is helpful. Again, it's helpful to sort of hear this from other people, and at least I don't know, build the case. Obviously you can disagree if you want, but I hope there's a reason for it. John is pointing out the nuance here, and there's just too much going on to be lazy with how we speak of this. So again, here's the other thing. We don't want to lose the religious connotation of the word, but we also don't want people to lose that part of their identity. I don't want to use a term that these first century people in Judea would not recognize. And even Jason Staples, and I was thinking about, I might do more on Jason Staples' book, but he points out that it's really shorthand. It's really a shorthand use of the word Judahite. So this is from Jason's book. It's Paul and the Resurrection of Israel. So you notice that idea of the resurrected Israel, I think, is really key. I think that's one of the things that makes Jason Staples' work very interesting. I'm not through the book yet, but I will continue to pour through it and maybe do a follow-up. But he writes this. He says, although many have pushed for Judean rendering, the Judean rendering have done so in large part as an attempt to rescue an ancient text and modern readers from anti-Judaism in a post-Holocaust world. Amy Jill Levine has rightly pointed out that those good intentions produce a Judenrein, I don't know if that's how you would say that, excuse me, Jew-free text, a text purified of Jews. And this would be the fear. But again, what does it mean to be a Jew? If we go back to the First Fruits of Zion video, he talks about love for fellow Jews. I'm like, well, what about love for all people? what about just loving, all people? And again, am I sort of picking on him there for, whatever? But it's like, what are you saying there? I don't think he's trying to say that we need to be ethnocentric about this, but you did kind of present it in an ethnocentric way. If what being a Jew means loving fellow Jews, and you've overlooked other people, then I don't think the people who are honestly following Yahweh, the people who maybe even go back to the tribe of Judah, we don't want that faithful remnant to be obscured by our modern geopolitical insanity that's going on. And so we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose the faithful remnant along the way, but we also want to expose people who are pretending like they are that remnant and are not, pretending like they would follow Yahweh and are not, pretending like they believe in Jesus the Messiah but don't. And again, going back to this as an illustration, what does it mean to be a Jew? Does it have much to do? What's their other guy?
Everywhere you go and preach the gospel.
Whatever. Does it have everything to do for seeing the Messiah of God, as John is pointing out in his gospel? Seeing, believing, and having believed, you have new life in his name. That's John's point. So the Jews in John's gospel who see that become Christian. They become followers of Jesus. So, okay, sorry. Back to Jason Staples and Amy Jill Levine. We don't want to purify. Yeah, we don't want to lose the remnant, but we also want to expose the lies of some people. Let's just call it what it is. Okay, so distancing Jesus, Paul, and New Testament figures from Jews and Judaism. Okay, so again, this is where I would say, I would just disagree with Amy Jill Levine here. The Bible distances them from Judaism. Look up the word Judaism in the Bible, and you will get two references, both by Paul, both in Galatians, and both referring to his former life before he followed Jesus. Now, is he a Judean? Yes, he is. Well, he's a Benjaminite, but he would have been of the southern tribe, the southern kingdom, and would have been tied to that Judean culture, that kingdom of Judah culture. But he left Judaism to follow Jesus, and he makes that very clear. I therefore find Judean more problematic than Jew as a translation for Judaios, in that it translates a richly polyvalent Greek word with a more limited English word. Now, I would say the same is true of the word Jew. We're trying to make the word do too much, and it's just not richly polyvalent. It doesn't have the strength to do all that work, and it's leading to a loss of nuance and inevitably to a misunderstanding. Now, you can tell me if you're still hanging in there after this. I know I'm going long, but I do think it's an important conversation. If we lose nuance by just using the term Jew over and over again for various things, or if we're actually gaining a sense of nuance by realizing that, I think John uses this term more like we would use the term Judean than Jew, because clearly Nicodemus in chapter 3 is kind of different from Nicodemus in chapter 19, but he's clearly not part of this group in John 19 that crucifies Jesus, that says we have no king but Caesar. He's clearly not one of those. So, and I've said this before, but clearly the Jewish religious leaders didn't think Jesus was one of them either. So do with that what you will. Let's get to Lazarus, because I think this becomes very, very important. And again, if you're hanging in there with me at this point, thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know if I'll leave that Jason Staples piece in the video, because if it just gets too long, I'll just trim that out and I'll have to use that separately. So look out for Jason Staples and more interaction with his work and his book. Okay, so the significance of the resurrection of Lazarus, and if you're here, hopefully this is the payoff. This is the payoff right here, because right in the middle of John's gospel, again, a good storyteller, the beginning of the story, the end of the story, very important, but the middle of the story, you're going to put a lot of weight there. You have to do a lot in the middle of the story. So the resurrection of Lazarus, why don't we'll just go there. This sickness will not end in death, but for the glory of God. This is what Jesus says to Lazarus's sisters. We'll keep cruising. Okay, and we'll pick up the story. Maybe 27, maybe 26. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Again, belief and new life. Do you believe this? He asked. She said, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. When she said this, she went away, called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and was coming to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. Then the Jews, Judean, right? The Jews were with her in the house and consoling her. When they saw that Mary had got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came to where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he wept. He was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. So you have this really beautiful picture of Jesus mourning along with Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, and the Jews. This group of people that supposedly John sees in a negative light. Well, no, watch what John does. He recognizes that the Jews are there to mourn with Mary and Martha. They are caring for them as they should, as any good community should, particularly a religious one. Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. It's so funny. This is so funny because Jesus is always asking people to come and see throughout John's gospel. Now he is the one who's been asked to come and see. It's lovely. Okay. So the Jews were saying how he loved him. So now you see this group of people. They recognize the love of Jesus. They begin to see. But some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man also from dying? So that's the nuance. It's not just the Jews as though they're a monad, a monolithic group of people. There's nuance, and John is playing with that nuance. Some of them see, but some of them don't see. Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Of course, so the middle of John's gospel, we will see this middle again in the end in 19 when Jesus comes out of the tomb, the cave. Now he will be in the garden. Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he's been dead for dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, again, you will see the glory of God? What is the glory of God? The resurrected kingdom. Well, it is Jesus, right? He is the representation of the glory of God, and we see that in how he rescues us from death into new life. He does that for us on his own behalf. But we will see the glory of God, this new life that we have in Christ. So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it so that you may believe, so that they, may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The man who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with cloth. Jesus said to him, unbind him and let him go free. Free him from death. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done, saw the sign of resurrection, they what? They believed in him. John is not antagonistic to the people that he's calling the Jews. But he also recognizes that along with this faithful remnant, if you want to call them that, there are others. But some of them. So therefore many of the Jews saw and believed, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them, notice he doesn't call them, he calls them the Pharisees, and told them the things which Jesus has done. Now, here's what, this sets the stage for John 19. I know we already read John 19, but this will set the stage. Therefore, the chief priests, the Pharisees, they convened a council, right? What are they doing? They're meeting in a, what do they call that? A situation room, whatever they do in the Senate or whatever. They convened a council, and they were saying, what are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. And if we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him. And of course, not all men will believe in him and then come into the true kingdom of Israel. That's not what they say. They say all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. The Romans are going to come, and we will lose our political power. The Romans are going to come, and we're going to lose our estate. The Romans are going to come and take away what we want to hold on to. So we got to kill this guy. It's not exactly a religious move, unless you want to say it's a satanic move, it's a cultic move, but it's clearly they're a council, and what do they fear? They fear another political party. They fear the ones that actually have. They don't see that the kingdom of God is truly powerful, more powerful than the Romans. That is what. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. They see it. They see the kingdom of God revealed in the resurrection of Lazarus, foreshadowing the resurrection of Christ. They see the true power of God's kingdom. These other ones, they look at it from the standpoint of the world, and they're afraid. Now, Caiaphas, he prophesies, which is great. Now, he did not say this on his own initiative, but being the high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. Okay, this is where Jason Staples comes back, this little book. He will talk about non-Jewish Israel. Now, I still think Jason maybe, and again, I need to read the rest of the book, might be missing something here. Because it's not the other 10 lost tribes, right? So Benjamin and Judah would be in the southern kingdom of Judah. And the other 10, right, Levi would be there too. But it's that God is going to gather the nations, the Gentile nations, into the house of Israel, into the nation of Israel. That's the plan. That's always been the plan. So he's not just bringing back the diaspora of the Jews, or even the other tribes. He's bringing he's reversing Babel, which we will see in Acts. He's going to gather the nations into his nation. And the only person powerful enough to do that is Christ. Now watch what happens. And again, Jason Staples will point this out. The northern kingdom is the kingdom of Israel. It's called the kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom is called the kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom becomes synonymous with Ephraim, one of the sons of Joseph. It's really a Joseph kingdom. There's Joseph in the north and Judah in the south. But the northern kingdom is called Israel, and Joseph gets the double blessing. That goes to Ephraim and Manasseh. And then so the northern kingdom of Israel, the other 10 tribes, become synonymous with the name Ephraim or Ephraim. Watch what happens. After some of the Jews begin to believe in Jesus, where does he go? Some of you have already seen it on the screen if you're watching close. Where does he go? He says, after Caiaphas prophesies and after John makes sure we realize what's happening, that Jesus is going to gather together all of God's people who are scattered throughout the nations. So from that day on, that would be the Jews who disbelieved in him, planned together to kill him. And therefore, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Judeans, among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness into a city called Ephraim. And he stayed there with his disciples. So what does he do? He leaves the Judeans and he goes to the northern kingdom of Israel. He goes to Ephraim. That's the united kingdom of the north and the south. But the north has become the nations. So again, if you're just going to say, John uses this term, the Jews, and he uses it negatively, I'm sorry, but you're not paying attention. And unfortunately, that does damage to what could be a really beautiful reunion of the true family of Israel. Ephraim, the nations, right, scattered abroad, and the Jews. Again, who's not invited to this party? Yeah, the people who are trying to kill us, like for sure. It's not even that like they're not invited to the wedding feast. They actually have been invited to the wedding feast. They just chose not to come. And Paul will say, yeah, the branch doesn't bear fruit, it gets cut off. Is that the branch of the Jews? No, clearly not. Because there is a branch of Judah that is flourishing and that is bearing fruit. It's united to Christ, and therefore it bears fruit. And I think, unfortunately, one of the things that happens with the Judaizers is they will take their identity and put it in Judah when it should be in Jesus. And they might not say it quite like that, but there is a prominence that they place on the Jews that the Bible just doesn't use. If anything, I mean, John, who also wrote the book of Revelation, John will warn us that there are people who will say that they are Jews and are not. And I think what he's saying is that there is a remnant of Judah that we need to not forget. Have some people gotten a hard heart? Paul will talk about this. There's a covering over their eyes. They can't see, right? But then there's this other group who will say they are Jews and are not, and what they're doing is damage to a group of people who could come and see who Jesus is. And maybe help me out here, because I know like a lot of like sort of Christians who maybe are angry at the Jews or frustrated with the Jews, they'll point this out. But I think they're missing something. It's sort of equally like I do think First Fruits of Zion is missing something here. But then anybody who's just like angry at the Jews is missing something. Again, I think translating the term better will help. They say they are Jews and are not. And then what is and actually I do think the First Fruits of Zion, the guy here, he says this, maybe I'll play this clip again. He says John is using this term ironically, like when your parents would use your full name, like you're not really behaving like the way who you really are. You're not really stepping into your identity of who you are. So I'm going to use this term ironically to say that's not really who this people should be, and sort of call them out to who God has called them to be. What benefit is there of being a Jew? Great in every respect. They were entrusted with the oracles of God. Yeah, man. And don't fail at that. Don't like God has entrusted you with something. Don't fail at it. We need you. And so I do think that there is a group of people who will disguise themselves and say we are Jews, or even say we are Christians. Clearly that happens too. And maybe you can help me cut through this and create a better conversation, because I think I'm sort of bringing this up here at the end, but if you look at Joseph and Judah and that picture of Joseph's betrayal by his brothers, and Judah specifically, who says, hey, we don't need to kill this kid. Let's just get paid for him. Later Joseph will embrace Judah. He will hug Judah at the dinner table after he reveals himself of who he is. And I did a whole video on Joseph and Jesus. And that's really what it is. I do think there is some deception going on that keeps people from seeing who Jesus truly is. I fall victim of that, but I want to see Jesus for who he truly is. I want to see this resurrected kingdom. I want to see this. Therefore, many of the Jews came to Mary, saw what he had done, and believed in him. I want to be like that. I want to see Jesus and believe in him. And I think I do grow sort of weary of some of the conversation maybe on the internet that might have Jews and Christians arguing with each other. Maybe some argument is good, right? But rather than seeing what's going on, which is Jesus uniting the world under his resurrected kingdom. If you have new life, then you are a part of that kingdom. If you don't have new life, then sorry, there is only death and darkness. That's what John is basically saying. There's only death and darkness for you. But in Christ, there's this ability to see, there's this new life. And I think my hope is this, that I see these things on the internet, like the First Fruits of Zion video or whatever, and I get triggered by it and I get upset by it because I think, man, we're still missing it. We're just still missing it. As a Christian, I don't have to become Jewish before I see Jesus. As a Gentile, I don't have to become Jewish before I see Jesus. That doesn't. And does that mean that I can learn from people who have a history and a culture tied to the Jewish people? Of course, I can learn from them. But I don't feel like that conversation goes both ways. It doesn't appear that, at least for some, and maybe you can help me find these people, But it doesn't seem that there are Jewish people who are saying, man, I can really learn from these Christians. And maybe that's our fault as Christians not reflecting Jesus in a way that's attractive or whatever. But I want to see that. I want to see that conversation. I want to see that dinner table conversation. And, you know, again, if you've made it this far and you are one of those people, I think of RJ, I think of Yosef, I think of Jacob, I think of Hezi, and others. And sorry, maybe I shouldn't be calling people out by names, but you know, here we're at the end of the video. You know, I think that I guess what I'm saying is I would crave better conversation, and my entrance into this conversation was maybe idealistically with the hope that we could have those conversations. I just haven't seen them materialize well. And I honestly don't understand it. I mean, when I proposed the idea of Judean, literally people were spitting at me. Like, that was crazy. And I don't get that, guys. I just don't get it. I don't get it. Spitting and calling me names. I don't get it. And we're going to move past that. That's what I mean, we are going to move past that because Jesus shows it right here. So I have yammered way too long. Man, if you're here, are you here? Are you with Jesus in the city of Ephraim? Maybe. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I hopefully have I don't know what I hope at this stage. This has been on my heart for a while though. And so I'm grateful for an opportunity to talk about it. And I hope it's clear. I hope it's not just rambling. And I hope to catch you in the next one.